So, how did the United States get to where it is today? Well, according to economist Jeffrey Sachs, a guy who was actually in the room advising world leaders at some pretty huge moments in history, the answer comes down to a single decision made about 30 years ago. In this explainer, we're going to unpack his really sweeping diagnosis of how America chose a path that, in his view, led straight to endless wars abroad and some serious decay right here at home. Let's dive in.
Okay, this quote right here, it's the absolute heart of Sachs's entire argument. He's basically saying that after the Cold War, America wasn't interested in being a partner with other nations. No, it wanted to be the only nation in charge. It wanted a unipolar world where one country calls all the shots. And that single ambition, he says, is the key to understanding pretty much everything that's happened in U.S. policy for the last 3 decades.
All right, so let's rewind the clock. We have to go back to the very beginning. For Sachs, the end of the Cold War wasn't just some simple victory lap. He frames it as a massive, squandered opportunity, a real chance for global peace that just got thrown away.
And you gotta remember, Sachs had a front row seat for all of this. He was an advisor to both Gorbachev and Yeltsin, and he saw firsthand that Russia's new leaders desperately wanted to cooperate with the West. But he just watched as, step by step, the U.S. made a totally different choice to go it alone and pursue global dominance.
And according to this diagnosis, that single choice had some pretty profound consequences. Sachs calls it the original sin of modern U.S. foreign policy. He believes it set the stage for 3 straight decades of conflict that were, in his view, completely and totally avoidable. So if your goal is to be the world's one and only superpower, what does that actually look like in practice? Well, Sachs points to America's policies towards Russia and China as 2 perfect examples. So here you kind of see the 2 sides of the same coin. With Russia, Sachs argues the U.S. just kept poking the bear, mostly through relentless NATO expansion, something Russia had been warning against for decades. But with China, the motivation was different. He claims it wasn't about a military threat, it was a reaction to China's incredible economic success, which was starting to challenge America's #1 spot. And this wasn't just some vague idea, you know? Sachs points to a 2015 paper from the Council on Foreign Relations as a literal blueprint for how to contain China. It lays out the whole strategy clear as day: cut China out of trade deals, build up the military all around it, and block its access to key technology. So for Sachs, this wasn't an accident. It was a cold, calculated plan to stay on top. Okay, so this brings us to a really crucial pivot in his analysis, because Sachs argues you absolutely cannot separate this aggressive foreign policy from the deep, deep problems that started festering inside the United States itself. He offers 2 main diagnoses for America's internal decay. The first big one is about our political system, a system that he says just plain stopped working for its people about 30 years ago. And at the heart of this decay, Sachs describes a system that became fundamentally corrupt. He calls it a pay-for-play machine, where huge campaign donations and powerful corporate lobbies are the ones calling the shots, and the needs of regular people just get drowned out. He shares this incredible story. He asked a member of Congress why a really terrible healthcare decision was made. And her response wasn't some complex policy explanation. Nope. She just put her face in her hands and said, "The lobbies, the lobbies." I mean, that really says it all, doesn't it? And the result of this broken system? Well, Sachs argues it's a 30-year track record of complete and utter failure on basically every major issue at home. We're talking deepening inequality, the opioid epidemic, climate change, crumbling infrastructure. None of these huge problems, he says, have been seriously dealt with because there's just no money or political will left to do it.
Now look at this chart. This is honestly stunning. According to Sachs's breakdown, once you pay for mandatory stuff like pensions and healthcare, plus the interest on the debt, and of course the military, guess what's left? All other civilian programs combined, that's infrastructure, education, science, the environment, literally everything else, get just 3% of the federal budget. 3%. There's simply nothing left to solve our problems.
But you know that corrupt political system? That's only half of the diagnosis. The other half is the rise of this massive, permanent security state that basically operates in the shadows, with no real oversight from anyone. Sachs calls the CIA a secret army whose entire job is to overthrow governments. And he puts the number of these regime change operations at around 100 since 1947. Think about that. That's a huge, unaccountable power operating completely outside of the democratic process. And look, this isn't some new concern. President Eisenhower, of all people, famously warned the nation about the military-industrial complex way back in 1961. But Sachs argues that since then, it has just grown to gargantuan proportions, creating a permanent war machine that basically runs on its own no matter what the public wants.
So, after 30 years, where does this whole journey leave the US? Well, according to Sachs, the verdict is in. The pursuit of a unipolar world has failed. It's over. The world has fundamentally changed. And this isn't some fringe view anymore. Sachs points to this quote from Senator Marco Rubio as proof that this new reality, this multipolar world, is finally being acknowledged, even in the halls of Washington. The game has changed, and they know it. And this brings us to the ultimate summary of Sachs's argument. The 30-year obsession with external dominance has created a government at home that just doesn't function. The country is left sick and divided at the exact moment it can no longer boss around the rest of the world. And so this leaves us with the final, really haunting question at the core of this whole diagnosis. Can a country that is so fractured on the inside learn to find a new, more cooperative way to exist in a world that has fundamentally and irrevocably changed?